The brass key felt heavier than it should have as Chen turned it in the weathered oak door. 3 months had passed since grandmother Eleanor's funeral, 3 months since the lawyers had handed her this address in Salem, Massachusetts, along with papers that made no sense. The house had been empty for 30 years, they'd told her. No one had lived here since Eleanor fled in 1994, leaving everything behind like a woman escaping a fire. But warm light flickered behind the lace curtains now, casting dancing shadows on the wraparound porch. Sarah pressed her face to the glass, her breath fogging the window. Someone had left lights on. Someone was inside. The key turned with surprising ease, the lock clicking open as if it had been waiting for her. The door swung inward on silent hinges, and the smell hit her immediately, lavender and fresh bread, cinnamon and something else, something that reminded her of her childhood. Her grandmother's perfume. Sarah. The voice drifted from somewhere deep in the house, soft and familiar. Sarah, dear, is that you? She froze in the doorway, one foot on the threshold, one still on the porch. Eleanor's voice. Unmistakable, warm with the slight Boston accent that had never quite faded despite decades in California. But Eleanor was dead. Sarah had watched them lower the casket into the ground at Forest Lawn Cemetery. She'd thrown dirt on the polished wood herself. Grandmother? The word escaped before she could stop it. Come in, sweetheart. I've been waiting. Sarah's rational mind screamed warnings, but her feet carried her forward into the foyer. The house was pristine, not a speck of dust on the mahogany banister or the crystal chandelier that caught the afternoon light streaming through tall windows. Fresh flowers, white lilies, sat in a vase on the entrance table, their perfume mixing with the scent of whatever was baking in the kitchen. This wasn't a house that had been abandoned for 3 decades. This was a home where someone lived, someone who had been expecting her. She called out again, her voice echoing in the high-ceilinged rooms. Grandmother, where are you? No answer this time, but the sounds of movement came from deeper in the house. Footsteps, perhaps, or the settling of old wood. Sarah moved through the entrance hall into the parlor, her fingers trailing along wallpaper that should have been faded and peeling but instead looked freshly hung. The family portrait stopped her cold. It hung above the fireplace in an ornate gold frame, the kind of formal wedding photograph from the 1920s. Her grandmother stood in the center, radiant in white lace and pearls, but instead of one groom beside her, there were 2 men. One stood to her left, handsome and proud in a morning coat, his face clear and smiling. The other man, to her right, had been destroyed. Someone had clawed at the canvas with their fingernails, gouging deep scratches through the paint where his face should have been. The scratches were so deep they'd torn through to the backing, leaving dark wounds in the portrait that made Sarah's stomach turn. But it wasn't random damage. The scratches followed the contours of a face, as if someone had tried to erase every feature while knowing exactly what they were destroying. What the hell? Sarah stepped closer, studying the vandalized painting. She'd seen hundreds of family photos growing up, but never this one. Eleanor had been married only once, to grandfather William, who died when Sarah's mother was still young. There had never been mention of another man, certainly not a second husband. She reached up to touch the frame, and that's when she saw her own reflection in the glass. For just a moment, in the wavering afternoon light, her face seemed to align with the scratched-out figure. Same bone structure, same dark hair. Same hollow look in the eyes. You look just like him. Sarah spun around, heart hammering, but the parlor was empty. The voice had come from everywhere and nowhere, not her grandmother's this time but someone else's. A man's voice, deep and familiar in a way that made her skin crawl. Who's there? Her voice cracked. Who said that? Silence stretched through the house, broken only by the tick of a grandfather clock she couldn't see. Sarah backed toward the doorway, her eyes fixed on the destroyed portrait. In the shifting light, the scratched-out face seemed to move, the gouges becoming shadows that suggested features she almost recognized. The floorboards creaked behind her. She whirled around to find nothing but empty hallway, but the sound of footsteps continued, growing fainter as they moved deeper into the house. Following them felt like the worst possible idea, but staying alone with that mutilated portrait felt worse. Sarah followed the sounds through a dining room where the table was set for three, past a kitchen where bread cooled on the counter and something simmered on an old gas stove. The footsteps led her to a narrow door she almost missed, painted the same color as the wall. When she opened it, wooden stairs descended into darkness. The basement. Of course it would be the basement. "Grandmother," she called down the stairs. "Are you down there?" "Not grandmother," came the reply from below. The man's voice again, closer now. "But family. Always family, Sarah. Come down and meet your real family." Every instinct told her to run. To get back in her car and drive straight back to San Francisco, to never think about this house or the inheritance again. But something stronger than fear pulled her forward. The same compulsion that had made her use the key, that had made her enter the house when she heard Eleanor's voice. Blood calling to blood. Family calling family home. Sarah's hand found the light switch. Bare bulbs illuminated the wooden steps, casting harsh shadows that seemed to writhe and dance. She descended slowly, each step groaning under her weight, until she stood on the concrete floor of the basement. It wasn't finished like the upstairs rooms. This was purely functional space, with stone walls that wept moisture and a ceiling so low she had to duck in places. But it wasn't empty. Against the far wall, someone had built what could only be described as a shrine. Dozens of family photographs covered a makeshift altar, all showing the same disturbing pattern she'd seen upstairs. Wedding photos with two grooms, one face always scratched out. Baby pictures where someone had carved away half the image. Family gatherings where entire figures had been obliterated with the same desperate, clawing scratches. And in the center of it all, a leather-bound book lay open, its pages yellow with age. Sarah approached the altar with trembling steps. The book's handwriting was spidery and old-fashioned, the ink faded to brown. She read the first visible entry, dated 1924. "Today I married both my husband and my son. The bloodline demands it. The thing in the basement demands it. God forgive us all." Her hands shook as she turned the page. More entries, more confessions, spanning decades. Different handwriting, but always the same story. Always the same impossible, horrifying arrangement. Finally ready to learn the truth. Sarah jerked upright. A man stood in the shadows at the base of the stairs, tall and gaunt with hollow eyes that reflected the bare light bulbs like an animal's. He stepped forward, and she saw his face clearly for the first time. Her face. Her bone structure, her dark hair, her eyes. Like looking in a mirror, if the mirror showed her as a man 20 years older and completely mad. "Hello, Sarah," he said, and smiled with her own smile twisted into something obscene. "I'm David. Your brother. Your husband. Welcome home. If you heard your dead grandmother calling your name from inside an empty house, would you have walked through that door?" Sarah's legs nearly buckled. The basement suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in as David stepped into the light. "Brother." The word echoed in her skull, impossible and true at the same time. Her parents had never mentioned a brother, never spoken of another child. "You're lying." She backed away from him, but the altar blocked her retreat. "I don't have a brother. I'm an only child." David's laugh was bitter. "Is that what Rebecca told you? That you were her only child?" He gestured to the photographs covering the altar. "Look closer, Sarah. Look at the babies in these pictures. Count them. Against every instinct, she turned back to the family photos. In the dim light, she'd missed the details before, but now she saw them clearly. Twin babies in christening gowns. 2 children on a porch swing. A brother and sister playing in a garden, the girl's face always intact, the boy's always destroyed. We were twins, David said softly. Born together, raised together, until mother broke the covenant. Until she decided she couldn't bear what the family required. Sarah's hands shook as she picked up one of the photographs, this one showing 2 children who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. The girl was clearly her, same dark hair, same serious expression. The boy beside her had been scratched out so violently that the photo paper had torn. I remember you, David continued, his voice taking on a dreamy quality. You used to sing to me when we had nightmares. You'd crawl into my bed and tell me stories about princesses and dragons. You said you'd always protect me. A memory surfaced, unbidden and impossible. A dark-haired boy crying in the night. Her own small voice whispering comfort. Arms around a shaking form that felt familiar as her own heartbeat. No. Sarah dropped the photograph. This is insane. You're insane. I would remember having a brother. Would you? David moved closer, and she could smell him now, unwashed skin and basement dampness, but underneath it, something that reminded her of her own scent. What's your earliest clear memory, Sarah? How old were you? The question hit her like a physical blow. She'd always wondered why her childhood before age 7 was such a blur, just fragments and impressions. Her mother had said it was normal, that children often didn't form lasting memories until school age. But now, looking at these photographs, other possibilities crawled through her mind like spiders. 5, she whispered. Maybe 6. We moved when I was 7. Mom said we had to leave Massachusetts for Dad's job. We moved because Mother refused to let you become my wife when we turned 18. David's voice turned harsh. She took you away, hid you in California, made you forget I ever existed. But she couldn't take you far enough to break the blood bond. The thing downstairs has been calling you home ever since. Sarah's stomach lurched. Wife. We were children. We were, she couldn't finish the sentence. Not then, David said patiently, as if explaining something simple to a slow child. The ceremony happens when we come of age. 18, traditionally, though some families wait until 21. The bride takes 2 husbands, her public husband for the world to see, and her true husband to keep the bloodline pure. He gestured to the altar, to the dozens of wedding photographs showing the same impossible arrangement. It's been this way for over a century. Every generation of Chen women marries her brother, bears his children, raises them to continue the cycle. The entity feeds on it, grows stronger from it. The confusion of love and revulsion, the breaking of natural bonds, its spiritual energy of the purest kind. Sarah pressed her hands to her temples. The basement seemed to spin around her, the photographs blurring into a kaleidoscope of destroyed faces and twisted family bonds. This is sick. This is evil. This is family, David said simply. This is love in its truest form. Mother thought she could escape it, but you can't run from blood. You can't hide from what you are. She looked up at him, at this stranger who wore her face. What I am. The next bride. The next mother. The next wife. David's smile was gentle now, almost tender. I've been waiting for you, Sarah. 30 years I've been down here, keeping the faith, keeping the covenant alive. Feeding the thing that lives deeper down, caring for it, speaking with it. It remembers you, you know. It's been hungry for you. The basement felt like a tomb now, the air thick and stale. Sarah could hear something beyond the walls, a sound like breathing, deep and rhythmic, as if the house itself had lungs. "Let me show you something," David said, moving to a trunk beside the altar. He opened it and pulled out a wedding dress, yellowed with age but beautifully preserved. Lace and pearls, long sleeves and a high neck, exactly like the dress in the upstairs portrait. "This was our great-great-grandmother's dress," he said, holding it up. "Every bride has worn it. Every woman who's taken her place in the covenant. It's waiting for you." Sarah stared at the dress and felt a strange recognition, as if she'd dreamed of wearing it. The lace pattern was familiar, the way it would feel against her skin, the weight of the pearl buttons. "I need to get out of here." She started toward the stairs, but David moved to block her path. "You can't leave," he said, and his voice was different now, deeper, as if something else was speaking through him. "The house won't let you. The covenant won't let you. Your blood won't let you. Watch me." Sarah pushed past him, but when she reached the top of the basement stairs, the door was gone. Where it had been was solid wall, papered in the same pattern as the rest of the house. She ran through the rooms, her footsteps echoing in the perfect, pristine space. Every door she tried led to another room inside the house. The windows showed nothing but darkness, even though it had been afternoon when she entered. When she tried to break the glass, her fist passed through it like water, but she couldn't climb out. The house had become a trap, and she was caught inside it with her brother, her husband, and whatever thing lived in the depths below, hungry for the next generation's sacrifice. Behind her, David's laughter echoed through the halls, warm and familiar and completely mad. Sarah collapsed against the front door, her fists bloody from pounding on wood that felt solid as stone. Every window was black now, every exit sealed. The house had become a prison, and she was trapped inside with a madman who claimed to be her brother. "Let me out," she screamed, not caring if David heard her. "Let me out." Her phone had no signal, of course. The screen showed full bars, but every call failed, every text disappeared into digital void. Even her emergency GPS showed her location as a blank space, as if the house existed outside the normal world. She slumped to the floor, back against the door, trying to process what she'd seen in the basement. The photographs, the altar, the wedding dress waiting like a promise or threat. David's face, so similar to her own. The impossible memories that felt more real the longer she sat with them. A brother. A twin brother she'd somehow forgotten. The sound of footsteps on the porch made her heart stop. Slow, deliberate steps, followed by 3 soft knocks on the door behind her head. "Sarah? Sweetheart, are you in there?" Her mother's voice. Rebecca Chen, calling from outside in the darkness. Sarah scrambled to her feet and pressed her face to the window beside the door. A woman stood on the porch, middle-aged with graying black hair, wearing the same navy coat Rebecca had worn to Eleanor's funeral. "Mom." Sarah's voice cracked with relief. "Mom, help me. I'm trapped in here." "I know, baby. I'm so sorry. I should have told you the truth years ago." Rebecca's face was streaked with tears. "I should have warned you never to come here." "There's a man inside," Sarah said quickly. "He says he's my brother. He's insane. He's talking about some kind of covenant, about marriage." "David." Rebecca's voice turned hollow. "Oh God, he's still alive. I'd hoped." She pressed her hands to the glass. "Listen to me carefully. I'm going to try to get you out, but first you need to understand what you're dealing with. What we're all dealing with. Just get me out of here. It's not that simple." Rebecca's eyes darted toward the darkness beyond the porch. "The house won't release you until the covenant is fulfilled. It's been waiting 30 years for you to come home. Sarah stared at her mother through the glass. You know about this. You know what he was talking about. Rebecca's face crumpled. I was born into this family, same as you. Same as David. Same as your grandmother and her mother before her. The Chen women have been bound to this for over a century. Bound to what? Something old. Something hungry. Something that lives beneath this house and feeds on. Rebecca's voice broke. On the perversion of love. On the corruption of family bonds. It grows stronger with each generation, each broken taboo, each child born from unions that should never be. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sarah's breath fogged the window glass as she stared at her mother's anguished face. Every Chen woman becomes both mother and wife, Rebecca continued. We marry our brothers, bear their children, raise those children to continue the cycle. The entity feeds on it, the confusion, the guilt, the love twisted into something monstrous. It's the purest form of spiritual energy it can consume. That's impossible. That's sick. Yes, Rebecca whispered. It is. But it's also our reality. Your great-great-grandmother made the original pact in 1924. Her family was starving during the Depression, her husband had died in the war. Something came to her in desperation, promised prosperity and protection for her bloodline. All it wanted in return was one small change to the family structure. Sarah felt bile rising in her throat. One small change. The women would take 2 husbands instead of 1. A public husband for society, a private husband for the bloodline. Brother and sister, bound in ways that fed the entity's hunger. Rebecca's reflection in the glass looked haggard, aged beyond her 53 years. It seemed like such a small price at first. Love is love, the thing whispered. Family is everything. But you escaped, Sarah said desperately. You got away. Rebecca's laugh was bitter. Did I? I thought I had. I took you when you were 7, moved us across the country, made you forget David ever existed. I thought distance would break the bond, that time would weaken the covenant. It worked, didn't it? I forgot him. I had a normal life. No, sweetheart. You had an illusion of a normal life. The thing was always there, always calling. Every nightmare you had as a child, every time you felt lonely despite being surrounded by people, every relationship that failed, that was the bond pulling you home. You were never free. I was never free. We were just, delayed. Sarah pressed her palms against the glass. Then help me now. Break me out of here. I can't break you out, Rebecca said softly. But I can tell you the truth. All of it. Starting with the fact that I never actually escaped this place. The figure on the porch flickered like a bad television signal. For just a moment, Sarah saw through the illusion, not her living mother but a hollow-eyed wraith, translucent and wavering. I died here 30 years ago, the thing wearing Rebecca's face said. Died giving birth to you, just like my mother died birthing me, just like all the women in our line die when they try to break the covenant. The entity keeps our spirits trapped, forces us to watch generation after generation fall into the same trap. Sarah stumbled backward from the door. You're not my mother. I am and I'm not. The spirit's voice grew fainter. I'm Rebecca's love for you, her desire to protect you, given form by the thing downstairs. It sent me to explain what you face, to help you understand your choices. What choices? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. You can fight it. You can try to resist the covenant, try to escape like I did. The entity will kill everyone you've ever cared about, slowly and horribly, until you submit. Your friends, your co-workers, anyone whose life has touched yours will suffer for your defiance. Rebecca's spirit pointed toward the basement door, which had reappeared. Or you can go downstairs and accept your role. Become David's wife, bear his children, feed them to the hunger below when they're old enough. Live in comfort and madness for the rest of your natural life. Those aren't choices, Sarah said. Those are just different kinds of hell. Yes, Rebecca agreed sadly. They are. I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry we brought you into this world, sorry we couldn't protect you from what we are. The spirit began to fade, becoming more translucent with each word. But there is a third option. One I was too selfish to take, too afraid to consider. What option? Rebecca's voice was barely audible now, more thought than sound. End the bloodline entirely. End all of it. Some loves are so twisted they can only be healed by ending them completely. The spirit dissolved into the darkness, leaving Sarah alone in the house with her brother, her husband, and whatever hungry thing waited in the depths below. From the basement came David's voice, patient and loving. It's time, Sarah. Come down and let me explain what love really means. Sarah stood at the top of the basement stairs, her hand gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Below, warm light spilled from the altar room, and she could hear David moving around, humming something that might have been a lullaby. A lullaby she remembered. One she used to sing to someone in the darkness when they were both small and afraid. I know you're up there, David called softly. I can feel your fear. Your confusion. But there's nothing to be afraid of, Sarah. This is just coming home. She descended one step, then another. Each footfall seemed to echo through the house above, as if the entire structure was holding its breath. The basement felt warmer now, less like a cellar and more like a sacred space. David had transformed the altar while she was upstairs. Candles burned in every corner, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. The wedding dress hung from a wooden frame, the lace catching the flickering light like captured starlight. Fresh flowers, white roses and baby's breath, created a border around the photographs, making the destroyed faces look like holes torn in reality. Do you remember our 5th birthday? David asked without turning around. He was arranging something on a small table beside the altar, his movements precise and ritualistic. Mother made us a cake shaped like a castle. You said we could live there forever, just the two of us. The memory surfaced unbidden, chocolate cake with pink frosting, 2 children blowing out candles together, her small hand in his as they made the same wish. Sarah pressed her palm to her forehead, trying to push the image away. I remember. The admission felt like defeat. We were never meant to be apart, David continued. That's why it hurt so much when Mother took you away. Like losing half my soul, half my body. I used to wake up in the night calling for you, and the thing downstairs would whisper comfort, telling me you'd come home eventually. That blood always calls to blood. He turned to face her, and in the candlelight she could see he'd been crying. Tears had carved clean tracks through the dirt on his cheeks, making him look younger, more like the boy in her recovered memories. I've been alone for 30 years, he said. Alone except for the entity. It kept me company, taught me things about our family, about the covenant, about what love really means when it's pure and undiluted by society's rules. Sarah reached the bottom of the stairs. The basement felt enormous now, the shadows stretching back into spaces that hadn't been there before. What did it teach you? That love has no boundaries when it's true love. That the bond between brother and sister is stronger than any other because it begins in the womb, in shared blood and shared breath. That what the world calls wrong is only wrong because they don't understand the depths of real intimacy. He gestured to the altar, to the wedding dress waiting like an accusation. Every woman in our family has discovered this truth. They fight it at first, just like you're fighting now. But eventually they understand that this is the purest form of love possible. Mother and wife, sister and lover, all roles united in one person. Sarah's stomach churned. That's not love. That's obsession. That's sickness. Is it? David moved closer, and she could see herself reflected in his eyes, her own face looking back at her with an expression of desperate hope. Then why does it feel so right? Why does standing here with you feel like the first time I've been whole in 30 years? Against every rational thought, Sarah knew what he meant. There was a rightness to this moment that terrified her more than anything else. Standing in the basement with David felt like coming home in a way her adult life never had. Like finding a missing piece of herself she hadn't even known was gone. Because we're family, she said weakly. Because we're meant to be more than family. David reached out and touched her face, his fingers tracing the line of her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. The entity showed me what we could have been. What we still can be. Children who look like us, who carry on the bloodline. A love so complete it needs no one else, nothing else. Sarah closed her eyes, and for a moment she could see it, a life contained within these walls, a perfect circle of need and fulfillment that asked nothing from the outside world. It would be easy. It would be comfortable. It would be completely insane. What about the children? She asked. What happens to them? David's hand stilled on her cheek. They're loved. Completely, utterly loved, by both their mother and their father. They grow up knowing they're the most important things in our world. Until they're 18. Until they're old enough to understand their role in keeping the family strong. David's voice took on that dreamy quality again. The sons become husbands to their mothers. The daughters become wives to their fathers. The love multiplies, generation after generation, feeding the entity that protects us all. Sarah opened her eyes and saw the truth in his face. The hunger that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with the thing that lived deeper in the darkness. You're not my brother anymore. You're just its puppet. I'm what 30 years of pure devotion looks like, David corrected. What you'll become once you stop fighting what you are. He stepped back and gestured to the wedding dress. Put it on, Sarah. Let me show you what real love feels like. Let me make you my wife the way our great-great-grandmother intended. And if I refuse? Then everyone you've ever cared about dies. Your friend Jennifer back in San Francisco, the entity can reach her. Make her drive her car off the Golden Gate Bridge while thinking of you. Your coworker Mark, he could fall from his apartment balcony, but he'll live just long enough to whisper your name before he hits the pavement. David's voice was gentle, almost apologetic. The entity doesn't want to hurt them. It doesn't want to hurt you. But it's been patient for so long, and its hunger has grown. It needs the covenant fulfilled, needs the spiritual energy that comes from our union. If you won't give it willingly, it will take what it needs by force. Sarah looked at the wedding dress, then at David, then at the photographs of generations of women who had stood in this same spot and made this same choice. How many had fought? How many had submitted? How many had tried to find a third option and failed? There's something else you should see, David said, moving to another trunk she hadn't noticed before. Something that will help you understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. He opened the trunk and began pulling out items, baby clothes, toys, small shoes. Dozens of them, representing dozens of children. All sized for infants and toddlers, nothing larger. Where are the children now? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. With the entity, David said simply. Fed to it when they were old enough to understand love but not old enough to feel revulsion. The perfect age for pure spiritual energy, untainted by society's corruptions. Sarah's legs gave out. She sank to her knees on the concrete floor, staring at the pile of baby clothes, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what he was describing. Generations of children, born into love and raised with tenderness, only to be consumed when they reach the perfect age for harvest. "This ends now," she whispered. "No," David said gently. "This is where it truly begins. Put on the dress, Sarah. Become my wife. Let's make beautiful babies together and love them completely for as long as we're allowed." He held out his hand to help her up, his face radiant with an anticipation that made her want to vomit. Behind him, the shadows on the basement walls began to move, taking on shapes that suggested something vast and patient and eternally hungry. The wedding dress waited on its frame, beautiful and terrible and inevitable. Would you bury the box, or open it? Sarah remained on her knees, surrounded by the scattered baby clothes that represented decades of murdered children. The wedding dress swayed in the candlelight, its lace seeming to breathe with malevolent life. David stood above her, his hands still extended, his face glowing with the kind of fervent devotion she'd seen in religious paintings. "I won't do this," she said, her voice hoarse. "I won't become part of this cycle." David's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Something vast and alien and utterly without mercy. When he spoke again, his voice carried harmonics that no human throat should produce. "You will," the thing said through David's mouth. "They all resist at first. They all believe they're stronger than blood, stronger than family, stronger than love itself. But love always wins, Sarah. Love always finds a way." The basement began to change around her. The stone walls stretched upward into impossible heights, disappearing into darkness that seemed to breathe and pulse with its own rhythm. The concrete floor became smooth black stone, carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. "Let me show you what resistance costs," the entity whispered. The air shimmered, and suddenly Sarah was no longer in the basement. She stood in a familiar apartment in San Francisco, watching her friend Jennifer pack for a weekend trip to wine country. Jennifer was laughing at something on her phone, her face bright with the kind of easy happiness that came from a life unmarked by horror. "Jenny," Sarah tried to say, but no sound came. She was a ghost in this vision, unable to touch or warn or save. Jennifer climbed into her blue Honda Civic, still smiling, still unaware that her life was about to end as payment for Sarah's defiance. The car started normally, the radio played her favorite song, everything was perfectly ordinary until she reached the Golden Gate Bridge. Sarah watched in helpless horror as Jennifer's face went blank, her eyes rolling back to show only whites. Her hands turned the steering wheel hard to the right, sending the car through the guardrail in a spray of metal and glass. The Honda tumbled through the air for what seemed like hours, Jenny's unconscious body ragdolling in the driver's seat, before it hit the water with a splash that sounded like thunder. "She'll think of you as she drowns," the entity said conversationally. "Your name will be the last thing that crosses her mind before the water fills her lungs. She'll die wondering what she did to deserve this, why her best friend brought this suffering into her life." The vision shifted. Now Sarah stood in Mark's apartment, watching her coworker water his plants with the careful attention he brought to everything. He'd been trying to ask her out for months, too shy to make his intentions clear, too kind to push when she deflected his gentle advances. "Mark, don't," Sarah tried to scream, but again her voice was trapped. Mark walked onto his 23rd floor balcony to water the herbs he grew in small pots along the railing. The entity's influence hit him like an invisible hand, shoving him forward. He teetered on the edge for a moment, arms windmilling, eyes wide with confusion and terror. Then gravity claimed him. Sarah was forced to watch every second of his fall, to see the exact moment when understanding replaced confusion in his eyes. He knew he was going to die, knew there was nothing he could do to stop it, and somehow he knew it was connected to her. "Sarah," he whispered as the pavement rushed up to meet him. "Sarah, why?" The visions continued, each one more brutal than the last. Her elderly neighbor Mrs. Patterson, who always asked about her day and left cookies by her door. Her college roommate Lisa, who'd stayed in touch through Christmas cards and occasional texts. The barista at her favorite coffee shop who always remembered her order and asked about her weekend plans. All of them dying. All of them suffering. All of them calling her name as their lives ended in pain and confusion. "Stop," Sarah gasped, falling forward onto her hands. "Please stop." "I can make it stop," the entity said gently. "Put on the dress. Become David's wife. Let love conquer your selfish resistance." Sarah looked up at David, but it wasn't David anymore. The thing wearing his face was something older and hungrier, something that had been feeding on twisted family bonds for over a century. His skin was too pale, his smile too wide, his eyes reflecting light like a nocturnal predator's. "This isn't love," she said. "This is possession. This is consumption." "What's the difference?" the entity asked. "All love is consumption. All love is possession. I've simply refined it to its purest form, stripped away the lies and pretenses that humans use to hide from the truth of what they really want." The thing gestured to the photographs on the altar, and Sarah saw them moving now, the figures stepping out of their frames to surround her. Generations of Chen women, all wearing the same wedding dress, all with the same hollow look of acceptance in their eyes. They were happy, the entity said. Once they stopped fighting, once they embraced their true nature, they found peace. They found purpose. They found love without boundaries or shame. Sarah's great-great-grandmother stepped forward, the original bride from 1924. Her face was kind but empty, like a beautiful mask with nothing behind it. "It doesn't hurt after the first time," she said in a voice like rustling leaves. "The revulsion fades. The guilt becomes something else, something that feeds the love instead of poisoning it. You learn to need the wrongness, to crave the breaking of natural law." Another figure approached, Sarah's grandmother Eleanor, young and radiant in her wedding whites. "I tried to fight it too, dear one. I scratched out his face in every photograph, thinking I could erase what we'd done. But you can't scratch out love. You can't destroy what lives in the blood." The basement filled with whispers, dozens of voices speaking in unison. "Join us. Love us. Feed us. Become us." Sarah closed her eyes, trying to block out the voices, but they came from inside her head now. The entity was in her thoughts, showing her what her life could be. Comfort. Safety. A love so complete it needed no validation from the outside world. Children who would adore her completely until the day they were offered to the hunger below. "You're weakening," the thing wearing David's face observed. "You can feel it calling to you. The bloodline recognizing itself. The family bond that transcends death and time and human moral weakness." Sarah opened her eyes and saw that he was right. Her body was moving without her conscious decision, rising from the basement floor, walking toward the wedding dress. Her hands reached for the lace, feeling how soft it was, how perfectly it would fit. "That's right," David whispered. "Come home, sister. Come home, wife. Let me love you the way you were always meant to be loved." The dress felt warm in her hands, almost alive. She could imagine how it would feel against her skin, how beautiful she would look walking down an aisle lined with family photographs. How right it would feel to say the words that would bind her to David forever. But as she lifted the dress from its frame, something else caught her eye. Hidden behind the wedding gown was another photograph, this one unscratched and clear. It showed a young woman, Rebecca, her mother, holding twin babies. The woman in the picture was smiling, but her eyes held a desperate sadness that pierced through the entity's influence like a blade. Real love. Maternal love. The kind of love that sacrificed itself to protect rather than consume to possess. She never forgot, Sarah whispered, understanding flooding through her. She never stopped fighting. The entity sensed the shift in her thoughts and the basement began to shake. Candles fell from their holders, spreading wax across the stone floor. The photographs of dead brides flickered and wavered, their smiling faces becoming snarls of rage. You will submit, the thing roared through David's mouth. You will love me. You will feed me. You will become what your bloodline demands. Sarah clutched the photograph of her mother and felt something else, a small, hard object taped to the back of the frame. Her fingers found it, pulled it free. A lighter. An old Zippo with an inscription, for my daughter, when the time comes to choose. Love, Mom. Rebecca had known. Somehow, she'd known that one day Sarah would stand in this basement, faced with this choice. And she'd left her daughter a weapon. Love, Sarah said, looking directly at the thing wearing David's face. Real love doesn't consume. It doesn't possess. It protects, even when protection means letting go. She flicked the lighter, and its small flame cast enormous shadows on the basement walls. The entity shrieked, the sound echoing through dimensions that human ears weren't meant to perceive. You can't destroy me, it snarled. I am in your blood. I am in your bones. I am in every Chen child that will ever be born. Then I'll make sure there are no more Chen children, Sarah said, and touched the flame to the wedding dress. The ancient lace caught fire immediately, burning with colors that didn't exist in nature. The flames spread to the photographs, the altar, the baby clothes scattered across the floor. Each item that burned released a scream, the voices of the entity's victims finally finding freedom in destruction. The thing wearing David's face lunged for her, but the fire was spreading faster than it could move. Sarah ran for the stairs as the basement became an inferno behind her, the entity's roars of rage following her into the house above. If your brother told you that becoming his wife was the only way to save everyone you love, what would you choose? Sarah burst through the basement door into the main house, smoke and otherworldly screams following behind her. The flames below burned with an intensity that defied physics, consuming decades of accumulated horror in minutes. But the house itself wasn't catching fire, not yet. The entity was protecting its sanctuary, fighting to contain the destruction to the basement alone. She ran through the pristine rooms, looking for anything else that might feed the flames. Curtains, furniture, the family photographs that lined the hallways, all of it was evidence of the covenant, all of it needed to burn. But every time she tried to set something ablaze, the lighter's flame guttered and died, as if the house itself was fighting her. You think fire can end this? David's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere, no longer fully human. You think destruction can break what's written in blood? The basement door slammed shut behind her, sealing in the flames but also trapping the entity's rage. Sarah could feel its fury pressing against the walls, searching for another way out, another path to her. She found herself back in the parlor, standing before the portrait of her grandmother with the two grooms. The scratched-out face seemed to watch her, the gouges in the canvas like wounds that had never healed. Eleanor had tried to destroy the evidence, had clawed at the painting with her own fingernails, but the image had survived. The covenant had survived. Because she didn't go far enough, Sarah whispered to herself. She held up the lighter again, but before she could touch flame to canvas, the house shuddered. Not from the fire below, but from something else. Something vast moving beneath the foundation, older than the basement, older than the house itself. The entity wasn't just in the basement. It lived deeper, in spaces that existed before the Victorian manor was built, before the Chen family ever came to Salem. The house was just its feeding ground. The basement was just its altar. But its true form, its real body, was something that had been here for centuries. The floorboards began to crack, revealing glimpses of darkness that seemed to extend infinitely downward. From those cracks came a sound like breathing, if breathing could be done by something the size of a city block. The entity was rising, abandoning subtlety now that its feeding cycle had been disrupted. Sarah felt the pull again, stronger than ever. Not just the bloodline calling to bloodline, but something older. The original pact, written in the spiritual DNA of every Chen woman ever born. Her great-great-grandmother hadn't just made a deal, she'd changed the fundamental nature of what it meant to be family, what it meant to love. You can feel it, can't you? David's voice came from behind her. She turned to see him climbing through the basement door, his clothes singed but his body unharmed. The fire below had gone out, she realized. The entity had smothered it, protected its feeding ground. The weight of 5 generations. The pull of blood that's been purified through love. He looked different now. Not quite human, but not quite the alien thing she'd seen in the basement either. Something between the brother she'd lost and the husband she was meant to have. I remember now, he said softly. When we were 7, the night before Mother took you away. You crawled into my bed because I was crying. Do you remember what you promised me? Sarah's throat tightened. She did remember, the words coming back with painful clarity. I promised I'd never leave you, she whispered. And I promised I'd wait for you, no matter how long it took. David stepped closer, and she could see tears on his cheeks. Real tears, not the entity's manipulation. For a moment, he was just her brother again, lost and alone and desperate for the connection they'd shared as children. 30 years, Sarah. 30 years I've been down there, keeping faith with a promise made by a 7-year-old boy who couldn't understand what leaving meant. The house groaned around them, reality bending as the entity's true form pressed against the barriers between dimensions. Through the cracking floor, Sarah could see glimpses of its vast bulk, something like a spider, something like a tumor, something like a black hole given flesh and hunger. It's not just about the covenant anymore, David said. It's about us. About the love we shared before the world told us it was wrong. About finding our way back to each other. Sarah looked at her brother, her twin, her other half, the boy who'd shared her womb and her first breath, and felt the weight of every choice that had led to this moment. The entity fed on twisted love, but the love between them hadn't started twisted. It had been pure, innocent, the kind of bond that children form before they learn about boundaries and appropriateness. The corruption had come later, fed by isolation and desperation and something ancient that whispered lies in the darkness. You're not my brother anymore, she said sadly. Maybe you haven't been for a long time. I'm exactly who I've always been, David replied. I'm the boy who loved you more than anything in the world, who would have done anything to keep you safe, who promised to wait forever for you to come home. And I'm the girl who loved you back, Sarah said. Who would have stayed if I'd understood what leaving would cost? Who would have protected you from this if I'd been strong enough? She reached out and touched his face, feeling the familiar bone structure, the shared genetics that made them mirrors of each other. For a moment, they were just twins again, 2 halves of the same whole, loving each other with the uncomplicated devotion that only children could manage. That's why I have to end this, she said. David's eyes widened. Sarah, no. I can't save you. I can't undo 30 years of corruption. But I can make sure it stops with us. She pulled him closer, holding him the way she had when they were children afraid of monsters in the dark. I can make sure there are no more Chen children for it to twist. No more brothers and sisters forced into impossible choices. The entity sensed her intent and the house began to shake apart around them. Plaster fell from the ceiling, windows exploded outward, the careful perfection of the preserved home crumbling into chaos. The bloodline, David gasped, clinging to her. If you destroy the bloodline, every Chen everywhere will die. Cousins, aunts, uncles, everyone connected to us by blood. The entity will kill them all in its death throes. Sarah had expected this. Had known, somehow, that the choice would never be simple. Save herself and condemn her family to generations of continued horror, or sacrifice everyone with Chen blood to break the cycle forever. How many? She asked. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Chen families scattered across the world, most of them unaware of the covenant, living normal lives. David's voice broke. Innocent people who never chose this, never knew what their blood carried. Sarah closed her eyes and saw their faces, distant relatives she'd never met, children who shared her features but not her curse, elderly aunts and uncles who'd lived entire lives free from the entity's hunger. All of them would pay the price for her choice. But it will end, she said. The cycle will be broken. No more Chen children born into this. No more families destroyed. No more mothers forced to become wives. The house shuddered again, and through the broken windows Sarah could see the dawn sky. How long had she been trapped in here? Hours? Days? Time moved differently when ancient things stirred from their slumber. She looked down at the lighter in her hand, then at the portrait with its scratched-out face. Her great-great-grandmother had started this cycle in desperation and ignorance. Eleanor had tried to resist it through denial and distance. Rebecca had attempted to break it through separation and forgetting. But none of them had been willing to pay the ultimate price. None of them had loved their family enough to destroy it completely. I'm sorry, Sarah whispered to David, to the entity, to all the Chen families who would die because of her choice. I'm sorry, this is the only way to set you free. She flicked the lighter one last time, and this time when she held it to the portrait, the flame caught and spread like liquid fire. The painted figures writhed as they burned, and somewhere beneath the house, something vast and hungry began to scream. The portrait burned with colors that shouldn't exist, the flame spreading from the scratched-out face to consume both grooms, then Eleanor herself. As the painted figures dissolved, the entity's screams grew louder, more desperate. The sound wasn't coming through the floor anymore, it was coming from everywhere, as if the walls themselves were howling. It's working, Sarah breathed, watching the fire spread to other photographs throughout the house. Each burning image released another scream, another voice crying out in pain or relief, she couldn't tell which. David stood frozen beside her, his face cycling between human emotion and alien hunger as the entity fought to maintain control over him. You don't understand, he gasped. The bloodline isn't just family. It's power. It's protection. Without it, we're nothing. Less than nothing. The house began to collapse around them, but not in any natural way. The walls folded inward like origami, the ceiling descended in spirals, the floor opened into geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Reality was breaking down as the entity's anchor to this dimension burned away. Through the chaos, Sarah heard something else, voices calling from outside. Not the entity's victims or the spirits of dead Chen women, but something different. Something that sounded almost like rescue. She stumbled to what remained of a window and saw them. Dozens of people standing in the yard, all with her face, all with her bone structure. Chen families from around the world, drawn here by the breaking covenant, appearing like ghosts made solid. They're already dying, David said, following her gaze. The entity is pulling their life force to fight your flames. Every minute you delay, more of them fade away. Sarah watched a young woman, maybe a cousin, maybe a great-niece, collapse to her knees in the grass. A child who couldn't have been more than 5 wavered like heat shimmer before disappearing entirely. An elderly man pressed his hands to his chest as his heart simply stopped. Stop, she whispered. Please stop. But the entity wasn't listening to her anymore. It was fighting for survival now, and survival meant consuming every drop of Chen blood in the world. The thing that had sustained itself on twisted family love for over a century was reverting to its most basic nature, a parasite feeding on its host until nothing remained. "This is what ending the bloodline looks like," David said, and now his voice was purely his own, the entity's influence flickering as it focused on consuming their distant relatives. "Everyone dies anyway. But if you become my wife, if you help me restore the covenant, they'll live. Wounded, but alive." Sarah looked at the lighter in her hand, then at the spreading fire, then at the dying people in the yard. The choice had seemed so clear in the basement: sacrifice herself and David to save future generations from the entity's hunger. But the creature was more cunning than she'd anticipated. It wouldn't simply die when the bloodline ended. It would take everyone with it, making her choice meaningless. "There has to be another way," she said. "There is." David's hand closed over hers, steadying the lighter. "We go deeper. Instead of fighting the entity, we join with it completely. Become one with it. Guide it toward something other than consumption." Sarah stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "The original pact was about survival. About protection. But what if we could change its nature instead of ending its existence? What if we could teach it to feed on something other than perverted love?" The house shuddered again, and more Chen relatives collapsed in the yard. Sarah could feel them dying, their life force flowing into the entity like water down a drain. In minutes, maybe seconds, they would all be gone. "How?" she asked desperately. David looked toward the basement, where the entity's true form was still thrashing against the flames. "We go down together. Not as husband and wife, but as brother and sister. We offer ourselves willingly, but on our terms. Show it what real love looks like, the kind that protects instead of possesses." It was insane. It was probably impossible. But as Sarah watched more of her family die in the yard, she realized it might be the only option that didn't end in genocide. "Together," she said. "Together." They ran hand in hand through the collapsing house, dodging falling beams and folding walls. The basement door had been replaced by a gaping hole that descended into absolute darkness. Without hesitation, they jumped. The fall lasted forever and no time at all. Sarah felt herself passing through layers of reality, dimensions that existed beneath the normal world. She saw glimpses of the entity's true form, vast and alien and beautiful in its own horrible way. It wasn't evil, she realized. It was just hungry, and it had learned to feed on the only energy humans could provide consistently, the corruption of love. They landed in a space that wasn't quite physical, wasn't quite spiritual. The entity surrounded them like a living shadow, its attention focused entirely on the twins who had come to it willingly. "Why?" it asked in a voice like grinding consonants. "Why do you offer yourselves freely when you've spent so long fighting?" "Because you're family too," Sarah said, and meant it. "You've been part of our bloodline for a century. You've shaped us, guided us, protected us in your own way. You're not our enemy. You're just lost." The entity's attention shifted, its hunger becoming something more like curiosity. "Lost? You feed on twisted love because that's what you were offered," David said. "But love doesn't have to be twisted to be powerful. It doesn't have to be perverted to be pure." Sarah stepped forward, extending her hand toward the shadow. "Let us show you. Let us teach you what our mother felt when she sacrificed everything to protect me. What Eleanor felt when she clawed at those photographs. What I feel right now, choosing to save our family instead of destroying it." The entity's form began to change, becoming less alien, more familiar. Sarah saw glimpses of all the Chen women who had fed it over the years, their essence preserved within its mass. They weren't consumed, they were transformed, made part of something larger and more complex. "Will you join with us?" the entity asked. "Become part of what we are becoming?" Sarah looked at David, saw her own resolve reflected in his eyes. They could die here and break the cycle through destruction. Or they could live here and change the cycle through transformation. Yes, they said together. The entity's shadow enveloped them, and Sarah felt herself dissolving, becoming something more than human but retaining everything essentially her. She was still Sarah Chen, still David's sister, still her mother's daughter. But now she was also part of something vast and protective and utterly devoted to the Chen bloodline. She could feel the dying relatives in the yard above, their life force ebbing away. With thought alone, she reached out and healed them, returned their stolen energy, gave them back their lives. The entity's hunger was still there, but now it fed on different things, on the love between family members that strengthened rather than corrupted, on bonds that protected rather than possessed. David was beside her in this new existence, still her twin but now also her partner in something larger than marriage, larger than the old covenant. Together, they would guide their family towards something better, something that honored love instead of perverting it. Above them, the house stopped collapsing. The fires went out. In the yard, the Chen relatives stood up, brushed grass from their clothes, and looked around in confusion before disappearing back to their lives around the world. They would remember this as a strange dream, nothing more. But they would also find that their families were stronger now, their love for each other deeper and more protective. The entity still fed on them, but now it took only what they could spare and gave back protection, prosperity, and a kind of familial bond that transcended distance and time. Sarah felt herself settling into this new existence, her consciousness expanding to touch every Chen descendant worldwide. She was their guardian now, their protector, their guide toward healthier forms of love. The cycle wasn't broken. It was transformed. And perhaps that had always been the better choice. In the house above, investigators would find nothing but an empty Victorian manor and a note written in careful handwriting. Some loves are so strong they become something more than human. The family endures. The family protects. The family loves without condition or corruption. The Chen bloodline continued, but the covenant had evolved into something beautiful. If you stayed with this story to the end, comment, "The bloodline ends with me."